It was the night of the concert, a highly anticipated event that had fans lining up for hours, eagerly awaiting the opportunity to see the Queen of Music herself, Beyoncé. The stadium buzzed with excitement and thousands of fans crowded into the venue, the energy building up with each passing minute. The atmosphere was electric, like a wave of enthusiasm sweeping over every person in the crowd, leaving nothing but excitement in its wake. But what no one expected was the surprising tension that was about to unfold behind the scenes, at the very heart of the concert venue. Beyoncé, the undisputed global icon, the queen of the stage, was about to enter the venue. As usual, she had a strict security detail in place. But on this evening, something went terribly wrong. The backstage crew and security team, preparing for the night's event, were following their standard protocol to ensure the safety of everyone involved. But in doing so, they made a costly mistake. Unbeknownst to the security guards, the woman they were about to stop was none other than Beyoncé herself. Dressed casually in a hoodie and sunglasses, she was trying to avoid drawing attention as she arrived at the venue, preferring to slip past the chaos and settle into her pre-concert routine. With a calm, quiet demeanor, she walked toward the backstage entrance, accompanied by a small team of trusted aides. The guards at the entrance were busy, checking off lists and ensuring that only authorized personnel were allowed access. They had been briefed that no one, no matter how important, should be allowed through without proper clearance. They were doing their job, yes, but it was precisely in the execution of their job that they missed the most obvious thing. They couldn't possibly know that the woman they were about to stop wasn't just any celebrity, but the headliner herself, the one who would soon be the center of the entire show. But as Beyoncé approached the security checkpoint, the guards, distracted and focused on their tasks, didn't recognize her. They assumed she was simply another person trying to bypass security. Their failure to recognize her, however, was just the beginning of an unfolding spectacle that would send shockwaves through the venue, through the staff, and even through the media. What started as a simple security procedure would quickly turn into a moment of high tension, embarrassment, and public irony. Beyoncé's arrival at the concert venue was nothing like her usual grand entrances. She had always been a master of maintaining a certain level of mystique, but tonight she was in no mood for attention. She just wanted to get to her dressing room, prepare for the performance, and stay out of the public eye. With a hooded sweatshirt and dark sunglasses, she walked quietly through the backstage corridors, flanked by a couple of her security team members who were trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible. She had been in the music business for decades and had grown accustomed to the pressure, the spotlight, and the constant scrutiny. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight she simply wanted to be herself. She had always been fiercely protective of her privacy, especially on days when she had to focus solely on the performance. No extravagant entrances, no excessive fuss, just a calm moment to herself before hitting the stage. She was focused on the task ahead, mentally preparing herself for the show. She was ready for the crowd, for the electrifying energy that would soon fill the venue, and for the performance that she knew would leave everyone speechless. But even though she was mentally preparing, she couldn't escape the buzzing energy in the air. The fans, the staff, the whole event had an unmistakable vibe that came with being a superstar performing to millions. As she made her way toward the backstage entrance, she could hear the roar of the crowd outside the arena. It was a reminder of the anticipation in the air. But that didn't faze her. She had been performing for years. This was what she did best. But still, she couldn't shake the unease that came with being in such a high-pressure environment. She just wanted everything to go smoothly. After all, this concert wasn't just for her. It was for every fan who had supported her throughout the years. She wasn't just a performer. She was an icon. And this show meant everything to her. But little did Beyoncé know, the first hurdle of the evening was about to occur. Not on the stage, but right here, in the shadows of the backstage area. As Beyoncé approached the backstage entrance, she was greeted by a pair of security guards stationed at the door. The guards were in their late 20s, perhaps new to the venue, or simply overzealous about their responsibilities. They were focused on the task at hand, checking credentials, ensuring no unauthorized people slipped through. They weren't looking for Beyoncé. They were looking for people trying to sneak into restricted areas, and when they saw Beyoncé walking toward them, They assumed she was just another person trying to get backstage. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the guards said, stepping in front of her as she reached the door. "Can I see your ID and credentials?" Beyoncé paused for a brief second, realizing that the guards had no idea who she was. She could feel the heat of embarrassment rising, but she tried to stay composed. "I'm Beyoncé," she said softly but firmly, her voice calm and steady. She didn't raise her voice or push for recognition. She simply stated the truth. But the guards weren't convinced. They had been trained to follow protocol, and protocol dictated that no one could get through without proper clearance. And to them, this woman was just another overzealous fan trying to bypass security. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to show me some credentials to get through," the other guard said, almost dismissively, as if his words were a form of reassurance. Beyoncé, still calm, but now feeling the weight of the situation, repeated herself. "I'm Beyoncé, the headliner for tonight's show." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. They were unsure whether they were dealing with a celebrity impersonator or a fan trying to gain access through trickery. It wasn't unheard of for people to claim to be famous for the sake of bypassing security. Still, Beyoncé's name didn't seem to register with them. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't let you in without proper identification," one of the guards said, his voice now firmer, as if he were convinced that he was doing the right thing. His hands were firmly planted on the clipboard in front of him, as if holding on to the illusion of control. As Beyoncé stood there, trying to calmly explain who she was, the guards began to grow more confident in their position. To them, this was just another person trying to bypass the system. They had a job to do, and they were sticking to it. They didn't have the time or the patience to entertain anyone who didn't have the proper credentials. "Look, ma'am, we have rules for a reason," one of the guards said, his voice a little too sharp. "If you don't have the right pass, you'll need to leave the premises." The other guard, though slightly less aggressive, nodded in agreement. He seemed more concerned with getting this situation over with rather than dealing with any potential delays. "Please step aside. We'll have to call for confirmation if you're really supposed to be here." Beyoncé's frustration began to build. She understood that security was important, but at this point, they were wasting valuable time. Not only was she the person they were supposed to be protecting, but she was also the reason the venue was packed in the first place. Her name alone could bring millions into the venue, and yet here she was, standing in front of two security guards who couldn't even recognize her. Despite the situation, Beyoncé kept her cool. "I don't think you understand," she said, now more serious. "I'm Beyoncé Knowles Carter. I'm performing tonight. This is my show." Her calm tone only seemed to add to the discomfort of the guards. They began to stutter, fumbling through their papers, looking for her name on the list of approved personnel. But their confidence began to waver as they could not find her name quickly. The more they searched, the more embarrassed they became. What should have been a routine process was now turning into a public spectacle. After what felt like an eternity of fumbling through their lists and swiping through security logs, one of the guards froze. He blinked a few times, his eyes going wide as he finally saw the name on the list. Beyoncé Knowles Carter, performer. He looked up at her again, his jaw slightly slack as the reality set in. The woman they had been blocking for the past few minutes wasn't just another bay or unauthorized individual trying to sneak through. It was Beyoncé herself. The guard's face turned white, his body freezing in place as he realized who he had just been interrogating. The other guard, who had been searching frantically for any signs of her identification, finally stopped and looked at his colleague. "Wait, is that— oh my God," he whispered, his voice tinged with shock. They both exchanged looks of horror as the full weight of the mistake settled in. Beyoncé, who had been patiently waiting for them to get it together, finally spoke again, this time with a calm but pointed remark. "I don't need to explain myself to you any longer. Please, let me in." The guards, now fully aware of the blunder they had just made, quickly moved to open the door. But their faces, still pale with embarrassment, reflected the undeniable reality that they had just blocked one of the most famous women in the world from entering her own concert. The realization that they had just blocked Beyoncé, the headliner of the entire event, sent shockwaves through the security team. Their face had turned ashen, and their nervous energy was palpable. The first guard, still standing awkwardly with his clipboard in hand, muttered, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize. He seemed lost for words, his voice shaking as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He wasn't sure how to fix the situation or what to say next. His posture sagged, the overconfidence he had earlier showing itself as an all too obvious sign of his inability to recognize the person standing in front of him. The second guard, the guard, the one who had fumbled through the security list, was equally panicked. His hands had started to tremble as he fumbled with his radio, trying to reestablish some form of control. "We need to get this sorted out," he muttered, attempting to communicate with the team inside. "I need to call someone, right now." But in that moment, it was clear that no amount of radio calls or team coordination could undo what had just happened. The mistake was public. The entire team of security guards, now standing beside the backstage door, was fully aware that they had embarrassed themselves in front of one of the world's most recognizable celebrities. Their professional credibility had been shattered in an instant, and the weight of their mistake became even more pressing as they realized that their mistake would likely spread across the venue in no time. Beyoncé, standing with a calm yet unmistakably disappointed expression, simply nodded toward the door, signaling them to let her through. Her patience, which had remained steady throughout the ordeal, was beginning to show signs of wear. She had been respectful, composed, and understanding. But the failure of the security guards to recognize her, someone who would be the very reason for the event's existence, was no longer something she could ignore. The guards scrambled to open the door as quickly as possible. Their movements were frantic, their earlier composure now lost in the chaos they had inadvertently created. The doors to the backstage area swung open, but the awkwardness lingered in the air, making the already tense situation even worse. The guards exchanged a few more anxious glances as Beyoncé moved past them, entering the venue as though the whole scene had never happened. Despite the chaos unfolding behind her, Beyoncé remained composed. She walked past the now panicked security guards, her head held high and her body language poised. There was no sign of her being rattled. To her, this wasn't the first time she had been in a situation that challenged her professionalism. She knew that moments like this, though inconvenient, were simply part of the bigger picture. She had experienced moments where she had been mistaken for someone else, underestimated or misjudged. But this was different. In an ironic twist, it was the very people tasked with protecting her who had failed her. They had assumed that she was just another regular person, someone they could dismiss without second thought. That had stung, but Beyoncé knew better than to let that frustration cloud her focus. As she walked through the backstage hallways, she could feel the eyes of the other crew members on her. Some were still reeling from the scene they had just witnessed. She could sense the discomfort in the air. Her arrival had caused a ripple, and the guards' blunder would be the talk of the venue for the foreseeable future. Beyoncé didn't give them the satisfaction of addressing the incident directly. Instead, she kept her focus on what truly mattered: the show. The fans were waiting for her. The crowd outside was buzzing with excitement. And as the performer who had just experienced one of the most bizarre moments in her career, Beyoncé wasn't about to let something like this stop her. Despite her calm exterior, however, she made a mental note. She knew that this incident wasn't something that should be brushed aside. It wasn't just about the guards' incompetence. It was about the larger issue of recognition, respect, and professionalism, even in an industry where she had already established herself as one of the most influential and respected figures in music. As Beyoncé made her way deeper into the venue, the security guards stood frozen in place. Their earlier urgency to stop her had morphed into a palpable feeling of dread. In their haste to fix the mistake they had made, they quickly began communicating with other security personnel to figure out what went wrong. "Are you okay? What happened back there?" one of the senior security team members asked as they caught sight of the two guards standing near the backstage entrance, clearly out of their depth. Yeah," the first guard replied, still trying to catch his breath. "It's just, we had a misunderstanding. We didn't realize who she was. It's Beyoncé. We stopped Beyoncé from getting in. I don't know how this happened." The senior security member's face twisted into an expression of disbelief. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. How did they not recognize Beyoncé? She was the headliner, the very reason for the event, the center of attention. It wasn't just a minor mistake, it was a major blunder. This mistake wasn't just a personal embarrassment, it was a professional disaster that could cost the venue its reputation. "Do you realize what just happened?" the senior security member asked, his voice sharp. "You've just embarrassed the entire team. You need to get it together. Now." The guards, still visibly flustered, nodded in agreement. They had no idea how to fix the damage they had done. They could feel the weight of their mistake crashing down on them. It wasn't just the embarrassment of blocking one of the world's most famous artists. It was the realization that the entire security team had failed at their most basic task, recognizing who belonged and who didn't. Meanwhile, backstage, a few members of the crew had begun to gather, some murmuring about what had just happened. The tension was growing, and it was clear that the incident would not go unnoticed. Despite Beyoncé's composed response, the blunder made by the security team had left the venue feeling unprepared, embarrassed, and vulnerable. As Beyoncé's crew prepared for her performance, backstage staff continued to process the incident. The ripple effect from the security blunder had quickly spread beyond the guards' immediate circle. Word had already begun to spread through the venue. Beyoncé had been stopped by security, unbelievably, at her own concert. The whispers became louder as crew members and other staff gathered near the backstage area. "Did you hear? The security guards tried to stop Beyoncé from getting in," one person said. "They didn't even recognize her. Can you believe that?" Some people laughed nervously at the absurdity of it all. Others, however, were less amused. They couldn't help but feel the embarrassment that came with the security team's mistake. The level of oversight, the lack of recognition. These were failures that could have easily been avoided. Outside the venue, fans were eagerly waiting for the doors to open, anticipating the start of the show. But now some of them had heard about the incident, and the story had begun to spread. People posted on social media about the bizarre moment, taking to Twitter and Instagram to share their disbelief that Beyoncé had been mistakenly stopped at her own concert. Hashtags like #BeyoncéGate and #SecurityFail began trending as fans reacted with a mixture of shock, amusement, and sympathy for their idol. The viral nature of the incident made it clear that this mistake wasn't going to be easily forgotten. While Beyoncé prepared for her performance in her dressing room, the security team, who had originally been focused on maintaining order, was now the subject of viral ridicule. Their faces turned even paler as they realized that the footage of their failure would likely be broadcasted to millions of people. What was meant to be a smooth, secure experience had turned into a public relations nightmare. The news of the security guard's monumental mistake had already begun to spread like wildfire throughout the venue, and soon it was more than just whispers. Crew members, fans, and even some staff who hadn't been directly involved in the incident were talking about it. The viral nature of the story didn't take long to hit social media, and within minutes, a crowd gathered outside the backstage entrance, the buzz growing exponentially. "Did you hear about what happened?" someone whispered to a crew member as they passed by. "Beyoncé got stopped by security. Can you believe it? They didn't even know who she was." The absurdity of the situation had fans reeling. Beyoncé, the headliner of the event, had been blocked from entering her own concert, not by her own security detail, but by the very people responsible for ensuring safety at the venue. It was an embarrassing oversight, one that left many shaking their heads. On social media, the story quickly gained traction. Clips of the security guards fumbling through lists, desperately trying to find Beyoncé's name, began circulating. Fans reacted with disbelief, some posting humorous memes while others expressed their sympathy for the star who had been mistreated at her own show. It didn't take long before hashtags like Beyoncé blocked and security fail began trending, adding insult to injury for the security team. "Imagine not recognizing the Queen at her own concert," one tweet read, racking up thousands of likes and retweets. For the security team, the fallout was immediate and inevitable. What had been an ordinary night of working at a high-profile event had quickly become an international embarrassment. As the story spread, they couldn't help but feel the sting of their mistake. The tension was palpable, and the collective embarrassment of the team only grew as the minutes passed. Backstage, the crew continued to nervously laugh off the incident, exchanging glances of disbelief. They knew that no matter how much they wished it could be brushed under the rug, this moment would be remembered long after the concert was over. Even the backstage staff who hadn't witnessed the interaction firsthand could feel the awkwardness in the air. Some people joked about how they would explain the incident to their friends and families, while others simply stared at their phones, watching the viral posts unfold in real time. Despite the uncomfortable buzz backstage, one thing was undeniable. Beyoncé had handled the situation with poise and grace. Her professionalism in the face of such a bizarre and frustrating moment left a lasting impression on the crew and the venue's staff, as well as fans who were following the story online. As the viral incident spread through social media, the security guards who had been part of the mistake began to experience the fallout of their actions. Back at the security office, they gathered to discuss what had happened, but there was no escaping the reality of their blunder. The footage had already been uploaded, and the comments from people across the globe were flooding in. The reality set in for the security guards. Their faces, once filled with pride over their positions, now reflected a deeper understanding of their failure. They had been caught in a public relations nightmare, and the embarrassment was unavoidable. One of the younger guards, still trying to process the situation, kept replaying the incident in his mind. "I can't believe I didn't recognize her," he muttered, pacing nervously in the office. "I was standing there talking to Beyoncé, and I didn't even realize who she was." The older guard, who had been with the security team for years, sighed heavily. "It's not just that we didn't recognize her. It's that we treated her like any other person, like a fan trying to sneak in." He paused, rubbing his face in frustration. This is going to haunt us for a while. They couldn't deny the gravity of their mistake. The social media storm had only made things worse. Fans, journalists, and celebrities alike were sharing the footage and commenting on the incident. They were being roasted online, and the comments were relentless. Even some of their colleagues in other departments were questioning how this had happened. "I know we have protocols," the older guard continued, "but there are times when we need to use common sense too. We should have recognized her. This was a failure of professionalism, plain and simple." The younger guard nodded solemnly, the realization of their mistake finally hitting him. The shame was hard to bear, and there was no easy way to make it go away. It wasn't just a simple error, it was a mistake that would haunt them long after the concert was over. At the same time, they could hear the buzz of excitement outside, the concert preparing to start. The entire arena was electric with anticipation, and the security team knew they had failed to maintain the level of professionalism the night required. They would have to face the consequences, whether it was through internal disciplinary measures, media scrutiny, or a tarnished reputation.